So what's the purpose of recording anyway? What are
The
you
purpose
doing?
of recording, and I'll just give the general introduction right now. I'm Sadaka. I've been doing this meeting for 2 years for Spiritual Gay Men, the Facebook group. I'm not actually an admin or a moderator of that group or anything like that. So I just want to say, like, you don't have to belong to that group in order to join this. But I think that, like, for me, it's just been kind of obvious that as spiritually minded gay men, no matter what your background is, no matter what you practice today, or even if you're just like questioning and like, you know, exploring this kind of stuff, there just seems to be a real need for us to talk about this stuff and put it out there for other people to, you know, if they're in their own particular path work or whatever and trying to figure out their journey, then they can have some sort of a reference to like, hey, there are actually other guys out here like me who are going through the same things, who have the same sort of, I notice a lot of disenfranchisement with older spiritual traditions and religious institutions and that kind of thing. We often have that, but we also don't decry any of that. We've also had like differently identifying people, some trans people come in. As long as you're in the male vein, then that's completely fine with all of us. We don't care about that. But I think that men in general need to talk more about spirituality and matters of the heart and whatnot, and getting this stuff out there. And particularly gay men, you're already a minority. Then if you're a spiritually minded gay man, you're a minority is minority. And it kind of puts us towards the fringe, you know, and it's like, well, if I go where all the popular culture tells me that I'm supposed to go as a gay man to find love or to find friends, I'm probably not going to find people who are talking about spiritual stuff, you know. So that's the purpose of the recording. I'm going to put it on my YouTube page, but I'm also going to just post it, you know, maybe a couple times a week as we're gearing up for the next meeting in the Spiritual Gay Men's Forum on Facebook, just so that people I want to get more people involved, right? So that's the whole thing. So this will be our first recorded session, and I'm pretty excited to do that. We already have a pretty good group, and some of you are awesome contributors to this meeting every time you do attend. So without further ado, we'll just go ahead and talk about whatever we're talking about. I think it gave us some interesting stuff talking about, just briefly, alcohol and mediumship or having psychic experiences and that kind of thing. I recently did a video on my channel about channeling. Particularly, I used to channel a lot. I don't personally recommend it as a sort of just jumping off. This is the first thing you're going to try on your spiritual journey. I would like to talk about that. I would like to talk about more like high spiritual concepts. That's the theme of this Sunday of the week. Every third Sunday, we're going to talk about high spiritual concepts, but that is literally whatever that means to you, you know? So, personally, I've noticed patterns in my own spiritual practice, and I will just find that usually I take a long break, sometimes for way too long. Then I usually end up starting with like ritual type stuff that sort of like grounds me into that. And then after a couple weeks, I start to want to expand out of myself and like get away from just like the singularly individually focused work. And I end up like reaching out towards something a little more divine, you know, like a personage or a sort of entity or being and that kind of thing, which of course ties back into the whole channeling conversation. You need to be careful what you channel and what you work with. So I just wanted to just jump off on that. If anybody has anything that they want to bring up and talk about that. And for anybody new, we do tend to use the raise hand function. Just pop it in there and I'll always get around to you eventually, just so we keep things in order. Go ahead, Trevor. As the first time you're here too, thank you for joining us.
No, I'm happy to be here. It's funny that you said I don't recommend to do channeling the first time, because that's literally what I did. I started channeling, and Tony can attest to this, but I literally started channeling like the first time I was doing stuff, and like I definitely was channeling, and then I channeled some bad juju, and then had to do like a prayer with Michael, and then had to like get him in. So I had to get Michael to like protect me and stuff, because I started doing it. And then I was like, maybe I'm attracting bad stuff. But it was interesting. Like I immediately went towards more like the angelic stuff. As soon as I started back like in the fall, like I started like my whole journey and stuff. But I actually started with channeling, and it's really interesting to have started with that rather than like starting with crystals and stuff. I went like straight into the woo-woo.
Okay. Do you mind giving us a little more information about that? Like, what do you think was the kind of bad stuff that you were picking up?
Well, yeah, it was I can't remember exactly what I was doing. I think I was trying to channel something. And I was meditating and I saw like an entity like kind of come through like a window and then kind of like look at me, and it like
Mhm.
really freaked me out. Not to put bad juju in here. Then I had to like text Tony and I was like, I just saw something. I just saw something crazy. Because I think I was trying to connect with, I want to say like my ancestors or something like that. I can't remember what it was. But then after that I had to do like a prayer for Michael to kind of like cleanse my energy. And then after that I
Mhm.
was kind of like, okay, we need to not like meditate and then go into the astral layer, because I was like going into the astral layer and I had like no idea I was doing it. And then I was like, okay, like let's kind of bring myself, like when I meditate, like I could probably go into like the etheric layer, but like going beyond that for like right now is probably like not the best idea, because when you're in the astral layer, it's like anything is there.
Right. Yeah, that's really good points. Actually, for me personally, the first things that I think of is there are lots of layers, there are lots of different realms, and some people have predispositions towards being able to work or tap into certain layers. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should, not without proper training, not without proper purification, not without proper protections. And that's the only thing that I say to people these days. It's like, if you're going to do this, make sure you do it right. And I think there's not enough emphasis on how to protect yourself, how to put up these barriers, how to work with energy, first of all, to make sure that you can handle it, because even though you were trying to it's not like you were trying to attract some bad negative stuff or whatever, but you ended up having that experience because stuff can come through. You're opening yourself up to this, you're opening yourself up to a certain layer of reality and experience. And so suddenly something bad just like shows up like, hey, you know, I've heard it described as like being a grid. As soon as a person, like a light bulb lights up or awakens even just a little bit, they become very attractive to all these other negative types of influences.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what was going on.
Hmm. All right. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Johnny,
Mhm.
you got your hand up.
That seems like a really common mistake that a lot of people make. I feel like when they get into spirituality, they jump immediately to trying to connect with some deity or some spirit. My issue with that is, one, if you aren't psychically trained enough, if it's the first thing you do, you have no idea what you're calling in. Two, if you haven't done your shadow work, how do you know that you're actually speaking to a deity or whatever, or just a personification of some aspect of yourself? I
Hmm.
feel like people are really prone to jumping the gun because they're looking for validation and a power source outside of themselves, instead of doing
Hmm.
the inner work first to figure out who I am as a spiritual being, and then from that place of power and centeredness, exploring outward in a safe, you know, mindful kind of way.
Hmm. No, thank you for bringing that up. Personally, that's exactly the experience that I had. And I tried to channel like really, really early, like before I could even meditate for 5 minutes without getting sleepy and just like, bored as hell. And I would have the experience of just like feeling like I was channeling something, but then immediately, because I had this crazy skeptical mind all the time, I was like, no, I'm just talking to my super ego. I'm just talking to, if you want to call it a higher self, maybe that kind of stuff can come through. But basically, you're just playing psychological games with yourself. Like, you might not be a writer or anything like that, but you can imagine having a conversation with yourself. How would you respond? And you can also frame it as in like, okay, let me talk to the higher aspect of myself. How would the higher aspect of myself answer these trivial questions? And to me, it was always like, well, I can't be sure that I'm not just making an intuitive leap. I'm just inferring. I'm an intelligent person. I'm a rational guy. I can do that. So that also brings me to the actual experience of channeling, because it wasn't until I started to do crazy, shamanic work and energetic work that I would actually, this is totally different experience from just doing this, like, game with yourself, psychological game, back and forth, like a a Socratic dialogue or something like that. It literally, you can feel it. You can feel your consciousness merge with this other type of energy, this other type of consciousness, you know? And so it's a totally different experience when you actually do channel something for real, you know, at least it has been for me. I remember a long time ago, I was reading the Seth material, which is a classic in like the channeling literature. And he says all of it, like all of the stuff in there is really interesting, really good information, way before anybody was talking about multiple dimensions interfering with your, you know, spiritual path and all of these different lives happening simultaneously and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff that's like part and parcel with the new age these days. It was there in a book in the 50s. So I really do recommend reading it. Awesome stuff. That's the type of stuff that I was trying to do when I first started out and didn't have much success. But he literally talks about it being like an energetic mechanism. And you have this sort of like, it sounds very new agey, very woo-woo, but it's this sort of like triangle type shape that sort of like locks into place with the consciousness of the other being that you're trying to connect to. And that's what it feels like. It really does feel like there's just like a cone or something like that when you just sort of open up and you can feel energy moving into your head, you know? So again, that's not necessarily to say that any of that stuff is recommended until you do a certain type of purification and initiation and protection and all of that stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. Sorry, go ahead.
What was the name of the book?
Oh, the Seth material. It was written by Jane Roberts. She was the channel. She's one of those crazy trance channels who would go, you know, and just her demeanor would completely change. Her eyes would like get darker. She would have like masculine characteristics as this being would come and speak through her. I'll put it in the chat. And she was a complete science. She was like a scientist or a researcher or something like that. Had nothing to do with like weird types of spirituality. Kind of like put Christian stuff aside, you know, early on. It was just this like scientific, materialist, rational type individual. So the last kind of person you would expect to actually start channeling. But this being would come through, and he talks about different types of reincarnation, you know, all the multiple dimensions and all this crazy stuff that
Amazon describes her as the leader who launched the new age.
Yeah, basically. In a lot of ways, you know, a lot of people would say that the New Age started with like Theosophy and Madame Blavatsky and like Annie Besant and those people, but it's all been happening. You know, the New Age movement has a lot of influences and is really difficult to describe and define. A lot of it was also the sort of counterculture of the 1960s and 70s, and people were like, fuck the institutions, fuck what our parents were doing. We're going to do this now, and we're going to adopt Eastern traditions and Buddhism and, you know, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot that went into the New Age. Yeah, anybody have anything else about like channeling and that kind of stuff? I suppose because the theme that I wanted to get into was high spirituality. I should say it's not like I don't always want to just say no, and that it's like not a viable path. I'm not just criticizing it or whatever, because again, you know, there's a lot of channel material that I think is actually really awesome. I just think you have to be careful. You know, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
And then and when you're working with like a type of being, even if you're not like channeling, getting all this information and stuff, even if you're just evoking like the mother goddess or something like that and doing a little ritual, that's also sort of a type of channeling. You know, any of that type of ritualistic work or ceremonial work can be a type of channeling. It just depends on what you're channeling. To me, it just always goes back to energy. So you're just like bringing more of that energy into your space, you know, while you're working. For the new people that joined, Mahesh and Peter, we're recording today. So I just want to make sure that you guys are okay with that. If you don't want to be on the screen, then you can turn off your camera or whatever. But I was saying at the beginning, I just want to make these discussions available to more spiritually minded gay men, because I think it's an important thing to do today, because there's not enough conversations like this that happen in our spheres of experience. Go ahead, Tony.
I just wanted to say that you know, a lot of like my experiences with channeling have come through doing my healing work. You know, it's like I work so closely and integrally with like my guides. Like I can't tell the difference between, you know, when I'm doing a session, like where I end and where they begin. You know, like there's just this very smooth, uninterrupted flow of like, yeah, okay, like I'm tapped into energy, and then it's like this, there's just this like snap, and I'm just like blah 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 blah, and all this stuff just starts like coming out, you know, all of a sudden, you know, and that's like kind of like the only reason that I know that I'm channeling is because I'm like, I don't know where this is coming from. I don't, you know, but I've been working with it for so long that I just trust it so intrinsically. And I think like over the last couple of years, I've had like more and more clients like questioning, like, you know, where does this stuff come from? You know, and I'm like, these are questions I've never asked just because I trust it like so intrinsically. It's never led me wrong, you know. And in fact, as long as I kind of do whatever it is that they're instructing me to do, whoever I'm working with receives a great healing as a result of it, you know. And those are the results I'm looking at, you know, when it comes to that.
Interesting. Yeah, I really like that. And also it just goes back to because we both have a focus on energy work, you know, if I'm not mistaken. And I really feel like getting to know energy work is getting to know channeling. Like I was just saying, like even if you're doing a ritual, you're sort of like invoking, it's a type of channeling, you know, or just working with energy is a type of channeling. You're just channeling the energy. And consciousness is energy. These beings are like forms of consciousness. If you're channeling a being, you're also just connecting to their energy and allowing it to move through you. For me too, that also brings up the idea that the type of energy work that you do, especially when you're working with people, can be, you can be moved physically. Like you start sensing things in a different way. I'm like, okay, if I'm working with this being or it's coming through and it wants to work with that client, then you will be physically moved around as you're doing these things in order to match that frequency, if you want to call it that. You know?
Yeah, I've absolutely experienced that too, like the actual physical movement, you know, in my body. I'm like, okay, I'm not even like really doing this.
Right.
The results are always amazing. So
right, and it does feel amazing, you know. It's a good question too to ask, where does it come from? You know, I would probably say it's like, for me, it's like, it's more, what am I trying to say? I don't want to say it's like safer, but it's like, it would be more appropriate for me to sort of like imbue the space or the sacred space with a type of intention to work with a specific being. But that's just me, you know. Sure. I used to do like light language healing for people and that kind of thing, and obviously that's a type of channeling as well. And I would sometimes like, okay, we're gonna work with Pele and da 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 da, and then I would connect and I'd be like, bitch, don't want to work with me right now. You know, it's like,
I've had that experience too.
Yeah, let's let whatever wants to come through, you know, and that can be a really powerful experience too. But once again, no, go ahead.
I just feel like sometimes, you know, as you're talking about it, actually, it's kind of like becoming more clear to me. Like it rather than it being any one being, it kind of feels like I'm more plugged into a universal consciousness. And I think that's what's flowing through me, you know, because maybe it doesn't have a specific identity, whatever it is that I'm working with. But no, I agree with you, and I think that it gives people a lot of safety, I guess, a sense of safety, like spiritually, to think like, oh, okay, you know, this is a being that like I know of, and oh, you work with the Virgin Mary, okay, that's something that I trust, you know, so like that makes me as a client, the recipient, feel safer, you know, like, are you working with archangels? Well, that makes me feel safer, you know, whatever, you know, like you tell somebody that you're working with like, you know, demonic entities, they might not be as inclined to feel safe in that session. And some people would.
I can imagine Lucifer wants to heal you today, you know.
He needs you to do his work here on this earth.
Yes, my boy. Go ahead, Trevor.
Yeah, I wanted to completely back up what Tony was saying about like when you do energy work, because I do energy work under Tony as well. And so the thing that's really interesting is that like information does just come through, especially when I do Reiki or any other energy work. It just will kind of come through, and then I'm able to access information about like oh, this person's heart is, there's something wrong with their heart, or this person's leg is messed up, or this person's feeling this emotion, or they're feeling that. And I've never really questioned like where that's come from. But on the flip side of that, I work with the angels a lot. So I'll ask Michael or Raphael, like I'll channel them directly, like if I want really specific answers. So I don't usually have people ask me like, where is this information coming from? People just kind of like trust that they're like, oh, like they're a spiritual thing. Like this is a spiritual thing. But like often I will channel specifically Raphael or Michael for those answers to attain them. So it's kind of interesting that I'm using like very specific entities to gather information. But there are times where like I'm able to just access stuff. And I've never really thought about it, like where it comes from. Like I just kind of presumed it was the angels, but like I've never really thought about it. I just thought it was just kind of intuition. But it's kind of like what is intuition? Like is that psychic? Is that like beings telling you things? Like I feel like it's kind of a combination of both of them, but I've never truly thought about it. Like, you know what I mean? What's that difference between channeling and just, having psychic abilities? Like, where is that line? Is it blurred? Are they separate? Like, where does that kind of fall in? You know what I mean?
Right, sure. Yeah, when are you pulling from the Akashic records or the sort of universal consciousness or universal energy like Tony was talking about? And where do you draw the line between that and simple fantasy? I think the fact that we can fantasize, that we can just imagine, or maybe the word imagination is better, that is an extraordinary divine thing that we have to be able to imagine. A cat can't necessarily imagine stuff. We like to think, okay, animals are on a very special level and plane of consciousness and existence, and we all love our kitties or our dogs or whatever. But the fact is that they don't have the same type of divine spark consciousness that we do. We are able to do some very strange things as humans, like imagine something that does not exist. If we're able to do that, then obviously I think it's just a little bit of a further step towards actually channeling something. Where does that fantasy come from? Where does the imagination actually come from? You can't really define it. It's obviously non-local and all of that, and probably is not just induced by neuronal firing or whatever. I think that's kind of silly. But I was going to hit on another point you said. Oh yeah, just the universal consciousness, and that kind of thing. I think that's a really great thing to pull from, just universal energy or that unity consciousness, unified consciousness, because when you get to that level of spiritual unity, there's not really any badness that can happen. You're not going to be working with some entity that, I don't know, maybe people through the years have fed into this being and it's created sort of like a tupa type consciousness or whatever around it, that maybe I don't want to connect to that. Maybe I don't want to channel that, So I was just going to mention that. Yeah, Johnny, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that channeling, for me, a big issue is people not questioning it. I think we put a little bit too much trust in just, it just comes from spirit. Well, spirit is a very large spectrum. When I have conversations with people, I really encourage them to treat a spirit like you would a living person. They have their own agenda. They have their own wants, needs. This whole, they're just perfect and they just want the highest for everything. I personally don't trust that. I think everything has some kind of end goal. And as long as your intention lines up with theirs, you're good. And I think there is a lot of good out there. But if you don't ask the questions, I think you put yourself at a disadvantage. And another thing I don't feel like people talk about is whatever you're channeling, it's like any other muscle. Whatever you're channeling, it's going to change your aura. It's going to change your consciousness. So I think you really, what are you morphing into? I mean, if you're having these conversations, if you're letting this energy flow through you, it is maybe permanently, affecting you. So you need to know what that is. For me, intuition is tapping into the divine consciousness, the mass consciousness, whatever that is. But I almost feel like people trust or will put more weight behind a channeled message than just intuition. Whereas I feel like you should start with intuition, figure out how much information you can get from your own higher self, and then you can start consulting the experts in other fields, so to speak.
Mhm. No, I agree with that completely. Yeah, I think we have a sort of similar tack on that. You know, I always was much more comfortable figuring out my own stuff first, pulling things from inside, you know, like a lot of the traditions say you're supposed to. And I mentioned this in my channeling video, or why I don't channel video, honestly. It was if you look at all of the old spiritual traditions, not really a single one of them that I can think about recommends just channeling willy-nilly without preparing yourself, like you said, without developing those muscles in order to do so. You know, yeah, just that. Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, I really like what you're bringing up about like the ethics, I think, of channeling, and being honorable and trying to get to know and to understand and develop relationships with these etheric beings. I think that's a very good point. Um, and then I think we shouldn't be encouraging people just to literally trust like anything that just like randomly comes through. I mean, I definitely support that, because like I have experienced a number of people who have come into my office this last year who all have had a spiritual attachment that was not favorable, that was deteriorating their physical and mental health, and having to remove these entities from them and stuff. And it was and I think a lot of that comes from maybe not asking the right questions, but then again, like on the other hand, I think like for me personally, I have a lot of spiritual protection, and I do a lot of things around the work that I do to ensure that there is that spiritual protection. So anything that does enter my workspace, like there's a very low probability that it's going to be something that could negatively affect me, but that doesn't mean it's impossible, right? So I think at the same time, like you're right, like people should be asking these questions, and like should we be trusting every spiritual healer who talks to spirit just because it's spirit, right? Like maybe not. Who is this spirit? Let's know them by name. But like something that kind of pricked my ears up a little bit about what you said, is this concept of like everything has an agenda. And I think that's like more of a human mindset than a spirit mindset, because like when we transition or we become one with spirit, we tend to lose a lot of those egoic desires, like, and our driving force becomes that heart force, that spirit force that links us all together, and we're in unison with that force, which I guess could in itself also be an agenda too. Like, I mean, that's probably not 100% inaccurate, but yeah, like I think that like we release those egoic desires for the most part, and I guess unless there are these, other entities, obsolete forces, who can who do have an agenda, right? And generally their agenda is to make sure that we're having a miserable time here on this planet, and
Right.
kind of bringing us more suffering, which of course we don't want to bring more into the world, at least we would hope so.
Right. I think that's a really good point. Again, it depends on what level of being or entity you're channeling. If you're channeling low-level astral beings, they may very well, just like the Bible says, that Satan will be disguising himself as an angel of light. They may present themselves as very powerful spiritual beings, but if they do have agendas, I usually find that they are not. Also, if there is possible to have a very high spiritual agenda, so you could say it has an agenda, or at least it has a purpose or a form. Its form itself sort of is its agenda, is its purpose to facilitate healing and enlightenment with people, and that's great. But again, I think it depends on what level you're tuning into, and if something starts messing with you, stop. That's all I say. Like, if it tells you to do this, do that, you have to be here at this time, at this place, and find the golden apple, and all these weird, like, that's just a being that's trying to get you to, that sort of time. What am I trying to say? Like in a Star Trek episode, there's always a time element. You have to do such and such to solve the case Otherwise, the whole ship is going to explode. If anything treats you like that, then just don't engage with it anymore, because
That's sales talk.
Spirit doesn't yank you around. So that's all I'm saying. Like high spiritual stuff. And again, there's that word, it's way too broad. And I agree with you, Johnny, about that. Spirit, what does that even mean? High spiritual beings do not yank you around. They're not going to send you on these wild goose chases and stuff like that. I'll let you, Johnny, respond because you had your hand up. I think Tony was saying something directly related to what you were saying. So go ahead.
Yes, I do agree with both of you. Agenda might have been the wrong word. Purpose, like what you may be a better term to use. And in far as yes, a lower being will have like an egoic thing going, but I think you have to realize that like the higher beings too. I mean, they have a very different level of consciousness, and people want to jump all the way to the higher angelic whatever realms. Their consciousness is going to be very different from your earthly consciousness. And I just think you need to be careful about trying to jump from A all the way to Z without having to take the steps in the middle to gradually and safely raise your consciousness. Even though it might be perfectly good, you might not be ready for it yet. So just stay in your lane, maybe, is what you should kind of strive to do. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Peter put something really cool in the chat. I just wanted to like briefly synopsize it. Is that a word? And then if you want to respond to it, Peter, you can go ahead and do that. He was just talking about the channeling work that he does, tries to come from a grounded space and disconnecting from the group consciousness. It depends on, I think, what we're talking about by either unified consciousness or group consciousness. And what you're saying in the chat, I totally agree with, which is the same reason I've mentioned in some of our previous meetings that I'm very wary about doing group work with people willy-nilly without knowing what level they're on, without knowing what their agenda is. There's that word again, or we could just say intention for the whole thing, or what they have to work on, what they have floating around in their auras and in their karma and all of that. Yes, you can come from it from a clear like Buddhist compassion perspective. Oh, we're all helping each other heal and process. But at the same time, we might walk away from a session like that with all kinds of other people's trauma and negative energy attached to us, and we need to be wary of that. So he said we may unconsciously adopt shared beliefs, patterns, and limitations. And so I think that falls into that same category. It depends on the group too, much like it depends on the beings that you're working with. If you're working with other beings, it depends on the people that you're working with. That's why it's difficult to do good work at music festivals. All right. So I think Mahesh, you had your hand up too.
I wanted to expand and explore on the use of any hallucinogenic, well, if I say just weed, in terms of that in connection with healing, because very often I've kind of felt at times that I may not necessarily want it, and I feel almost an urge that as if I'm feeding or indulging an entity with it. Indulging in the habit. Like there is, like, I find myself, I struggle with, it's this all or nothing thing. I sometimes feel like if I have a joint, like currently I'm off it, but when I did smoke it, I would feel like almost I've done one and a certain level of my will is impacted, and then I just want to stay stoned all day long. And then when I get off it, I realize that I never really wanted it. So how does it impact our consciousness when there is a substance involved?
Wow, that's a really awesome conversation point to bring up. We could probably talk about this for a long time. I'll answer it partially myself from the perspective of something that everybody seems to be in love with these days, and that's ayahuasca. If you look at the experiences that a person has with ayahuasca, it's absolutely the same type of consciousness that comes through and the same type of being that people have most of their experiences that they work with. It's a sort of female type of energy. It is very connected to the jungle from which it originates. It is very vegetal, as in plant consciousness based and all of that. And so it's a very specific being, I think, and energy or thought form, entity, whatever you want to term it, that people are both feeding into and getting information from or connecting to. When it comes to the other thing that you brought up, though, I think, well, first of all of that is possible. And I do think that plant spirits in particular have entities around them, or maybe one specific one that represents the spirit of that plant. When you're talking about harder substances or whatever, then it becomes even more difficult, because these are not things that humans are necessarily supposed to process. Like methamphetamine or something is completely lab created. It is not a natural thing or whatever, but oh my God, does it have entities around that kind of substance, you know? But the other thing that you were talking about is feeding into something because of either an addiction or some kind of a compulsion. And that, I think, also has its own type of tulpa or thought form entity around it. Because I smoke cannabis, you know, I'm proud of that fact. I talk about it. I think it can be a wonderful, awesome medicine. And I think that it can also propel your spiritual work or your energy work. It can be used very effectively. The problem comes into how you're using it, whether you have any guilt attached to it, how you're feeding into that in particular. The problem also comes in whether it's making your life worse in some way because you're indulging in it too much. Also, alcohol can be perfectly fine in moderation, whereas like a lot of people in the new age will say, oh, absolutely terrible, never drink a sip of alcohol. They go back to the origin of the word, which is al-guhul, you know, and it's related to the word ghoul. And so you're letting in all these murky, evil spirits and puts holes in your aura. Yes, if you drink it to excess, it is not good for you, and it can do all those things. But then you also have Sufi mystics who drink wine and spin in circles and talk to God, you know, so it can be perfectly acceptable that way. Or in Taoist circles, sometimes they'll drink wine to break up the chi after long periods of cultivation. We're talking about something specifically like cannabis. I mean, I would just say that it really depends on how you use it. I think that there's probably a negative aspect to the entity associated with it, and there's a very positive aspect to the entity that is associated with it. So yeah, for me, it's like I go through periods periodically where I'll get up in the morning and I'll have my cup of coffee, and then the first thing I want to do is like hit the bong, you know, and then I'm just like, it doesn't really affect my day-to-day life that much because I work from home. I do everything here. I'm not going to just sit on the couch and eat Cheetos all day. Like, I do the same things that I would do even if I was sober. But if I'm going to do something like this, or I'm going to create specific things that I want, yeah, totally wake and bake, create the things that I want to create and accomplish the more like energetic stuff or the spiritual stuff or whatever, I need a clearer head in order to do that. Otherwise, I'll just be like, this is too hard right now. I'm just going to go play some video games or whatever. So I don't know. I'll let some of the other people go. Tony.
Sorry. For me, I find that I would meditate more, but I think the only area where I would just put an end to it is because I work with kids, I work with adults, I teach, and I work with my body with dance. So in that sense, I think it impacts me, and I think that's my self-preservation thing where I have to step back. And the other thing I feel is when I'm in that state, my tolerance level, that's something I have noticed. So every time I've gone and then stopped and gone, like I'll never smoke throughout. Like I have the discipline to just stop. And I feel that my tolerance levels are very low. So I lose it more easily. And I feel that it's not fair that my indulgences would impact the kids that I work with or the people that I work with. So I think that is my primary reason for me to back off. And I can actually sense the difference because it's never continuous. Like I have the ability to just say, okay, I'm done. And then I won't smoke for 6 months or a year. But when I do start, that is the issue. So this is something that I struggle with. Like if I could just have one joint and just chill out for the evening, it doesn't happen.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, no, I tell myself the exact same thing about tobacco and cannabis. I'm just like, okay, I'm just gonna get to that one spliff a night, baby, and it never fucking happens. I know, I'm terrible. Go ahead, Tony. You can respond to that too.
Yeah, it seems to me like in my experience, like I run into a lot of people who are using things like psilocybin and DMT and stuff like that, and claiming that it's allowing them to access like shamanic realms and do that kind of work, and I think they claim the same to be true of other hallucinogens, and kind of like not too dissimilar from what Johnny was just saying. It to access those higher realms without doing the exercise to get there on your own, I feel like is incredibly dangerous, So like I try to like dissuade people from using hallucinogens as a way to access spirit. I'm like, we gotta get there through just your own consciousness and your own meditative states first, right? But then like maybe in the future, once we've kind of developed those muscles, to borrow your comment, over time, then like we can expand that heightened consciousness into these other realms. But I think there's steps that come before you do that. I don't think you use that as your gateway to access these realms, though. Like I think that's extraordinarily dangerous, and we should really be leading people away from that kind of thinking as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would say that it could be either. I know that some people will go into like a shamanic experience and have like an ayahuasca ceremony or something, and then it does lead them into good things and other types of healing. But I do notice like the biggest thing for me that I disagree with these days is that people just think the experience itself is spiritual. It's sort of like the Terence McKenna approach to, well, if you want to dance in the mystery, then you just need to take 5 dried grams of mushrooms, and it's like I was like caught in that mentality for so long because I didn't have these other spiritual experiences. I couldn't meditate, I couldn't channel, I wasn't having experiences of bliss or unity consciousness or what the heck ever. And so I literally thought that just taking the mushroom was my spiritual experience,
like you and so many other people do. Yeah,
like so many people do. Or people like will just smoke DMT and they'll do 3 or 4 hits to get to those crazy realms. The most profound probably psychedelic substance that we have, at least it's the most visually profound or visually intense for people, and get blasted into these quadrants that I'm not even sure we're supposed to visit, and come back down and be like, wow, that was so spiritual. And I don't think that that's necessarily the case. You can put it into that context, but again, it becomes the sacred space, the intention, and everything that you build up on purpose. And you have to put yourself back together again, especially after a psychedelic experience, Yeah. Let's see. Johnny put in here, my friend Santosh says psychedelics, etc., can get you to higher states, but they can't teach you how to stay there. I think that that's a good point too to bring up, and it ties into what you were saying, Tony. It's just like it can be a sort of gateway or whatever, but you really need to figure out how to do it on your own. Yeah, good stuff. I don't know if that really answers your question, Mahesh. We're just trying to like snowball off of what you were saying. It's like, I don't know. I would say,
I just wanted to hear your experiences, because sometimes, you have stuff and it's very isolated. So when you share it and you hear other people, it just gives you a much wider, expanded understanding of the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Cool. No other hands up. Anybody have anything else that they want to add to that concept, that conversation? Okay. Well, we might as well just go ahead and open it up at this point. Is there anything that anyone wants to bring up about anything in particular? I always, leave the floor open for particular spiritual questions that you might have, because everybody has a really interesting array of experience who comes into this meeting, into this group. And so we're always like teaching each other everything and learning everything from everybody else. So I really do appreciate that. Go ahead, Johnny.
I'm curious as to what everyone, or if you're even Since we're all plugged into the mass consciousness and things are very chaotic right now, what techniques or what are you doing to try to, I don't know, either improve the situation for yourself, improve the situation for your community? Are we doing transformative, like alchemical work to try to shift the mass consciousness? Is anyone playing in those realms?
I personally leave that alone. I have a hard enough time dealing with it myself. You know, even if I'm not plugged into the news, if I'm not plugged into social media and that kind of stuff, I end up feeling it anyway. And so for me, again, it goes back to my energetic work and my spiritual work and my personal cultivation. Like I have to do crazy protections and I have to do them more frequently than I'm doing them now, like self-admittedly, like I need to be doing more work. But for me, that involves like, you know, I do a lot of chanting and that kind of stuff. My own particular set of mantras and things like that. I'll do a little bit of more of the like Western seeming type of ritualistic magic and either draw like a symbol, that kind of thing in my space, evoking the 4 directions. Or lately I've been working with 8 directions, which also relates to the Bagua and all that kind of stuff and all my Taoist stuff. And I just have to have this whole sphere of wards around me. Otherwise, I feel I get depressed very, very easily, especially in a big city like this, or just like testy. I've been getting really testy lately with little things. I'd be like, I'll just feel fine, and I'm just like vibing along, and then something will not work. I'll be like, motherfucker, you know, it just like comes out of you. You're like, wait a minute, where did that come from? I'm not even angry right now, but yeah, very sensitive lately. And again, when it comes to the stuff that's going on in the world, the only way I believe the only thing that I can do, or the best thing that I can do, is take care of myself internally. And so if I'm trying to affect everyone else and everything else, I have to get to my good place and my place of peace and harmony and, you know, good vibing. And then I feel like I'm putting that out into the rest of the world if I do go out into the rest of the world, or even if I don't, you know. So I think that's my version of responsibility towards it. I don't think any spiritual teacher or master is going to tell you, you need to go get angry because Trump has been elected again and he's taking away all of your rights. Like we're here to talk about high spirituality. You know, I think that there may be a certain element of that. Maybe your own personal journey is doing some sort of activism or something like that, you know, but I really don't think that like typing on the social media outlets or whatever and getting all fired up and arguing with people is going to do much good. So go ahead, Tony.
I think the way that I have been doing my part is really just I walked into this whole election with a very clear mindset on what was going to be and what was going to come out of the situation. Like I knew how it was going to go 6 months ago, so I was already like prepared within myself well for when we stepped in and we crossed into like the here and now. And you know, everybody around me of course is losing it, you know, and you know, it's just been my personal responsibility to maintain a sense of stability and clear-headedness and insightfulness within myself so that I can help to make that experience easier for those that I experience, for those who are around me, whether they're friends, whether they're clients, whether it's just somebody I run into as a trans person at a grocery store and having a bad day. Like, and I kind of like work with this underlying concept right now of what can I do to make life just a little safer for one person today, and just start there, like have that be just safer for one person. And if I do that, fantastic. If I do that for 6 people, even better, you know, like. And if it's none, then you know, maybe it's just me taking care of myself that day, you know, so I can continue to do that. So I guess that's how I've assigned my own responsibility in the
Right. That's lovely. Thank you for that. I think that's a good lesson just in general, you know, like even when times are good, if they ever shall be, then we would still want to be doing the same thing, right? Just make somebody feel good that day, make somebody feel safe, which is honestly not that hard to do when you think about it. Go ahead, Trevor.
Yeah, I feel like I'm in the middle of between what Johnny's saying. I totally understand like the whole mass consciousness and wanting to change everything, because that's very much like what I want to do. Like I want to like save everyone and do everything for everybody, but like I know that's not feasible. So I'm understanding that I have to kind of like focus on myself and be able to like, because I can't affect other people if I'm not in the space to be able to affect them in a positive way. Like I can't be there for someone if I'm not there for myself. So I've been really focusing on like kind of blocking stuff out, but like understanding that like regardless of like what the election was gonna be or whatever, like the energy shifts and just how things were gonna go with astrology, it was gonna be fucking crazy. Like regardless like of whatever happened, like this was destined to happen. Like something crazy was gonna go down. So that's kind of how I try to like keep myself not like sane because I feel like I'm in an okay space, but like I kind of try to rationalize it that like I'm understanding that this is like just how things have to be. This is just how the energy is coming into the universe, and it's just like this is what it is. So I hope I'm not like purple washing it, but I try to separate like things from like being super 3D and being like this is all of this stuff going on, but it's kind of like this is the energy doing the energy. Like this is what it is. And so I try to think about that because the astrology is really crazy right now. Like my astrology, and then also like with just the worlds in the next like 4 years or whatever. Um, and I've kind of seen that a little bit, like psychically, kind of. But I try to do like a lot of grounding work, so I meditate like insane amounts. Like the amount of meditation I do is really crazy. But I'm just trying to focus on sharpening my tools, sharpening my crafts to heal other people. And I'm trying not to get in this space of like, if I can't heal everyone, like what's the point? And it's like I just try to focus on kind of the what can I do for just one person, like what Tony is saying. And just kind of using what I can do for other people. And it's like focusing on the people around me and the people in my circle and like using that as my life's purpose is to kind of like be good to the people that are in my circle rather than like thinking about trying to affect everyone because that's not realistic. And like maybe like once I get to a point where I could slowly start opening my circle up and getting more people in to like heal, but I feel like I'm not there yet. You know what I mean? I have to do more inner work and stuff like that to be able to affect mass amounts of people because I'm just not there with a knowledge base. I'm just not there spiritually or like emotionally. Like I still have a lot of my own work to do before I can like really school somebody on what they should be doing. That's my 2 cents there.
In one sense, we all do, you know, so don't sell yourself short. But I also think that's a very mature perspective to have, you know, just because you're aware of the fact that you do want to do more work and, you know, you could probably benefit other people better if you did that work first. You know, that's really awesome. I see a lot of people who are just starting out and they have one kind of like blissful, you know, divine experience, and then they're just like, wow, I'm an amazing healer, let me do all these things, you know. I'm just like, okay, just calm down, baby. You'll get there eventually. But yeah, a lot of good points, honestly. I think it's also this the perspectives that we have as we evolve as people. Like when you're a baby, you are the universe, you know, and that's great. You know, you kind of want to get back there eventually to that kind of spiritual space, but it's an unformed type of relation, an unformed type of consciousness in a way. And then you realize, okay, there are things that are separate from me and my parents, and then your family becomes your entire universe, and then your neighborhood, and you expand out a little bit more and a little bit more, and then your state and your country, and then the world. You have this world perspective, a global perspective. And I think that's really where a lot of people these days get wounded, because they want to heal the entire world. And yeah, that is a sort of ego expansion in the good sense. You know, you're encompassing these greater realities, and you want to have compassion for everyone, and you want to do some good that affects everyone and everything. But you have to realize that you get to that certain point and that's just not practical, you know. I also see people who are, you know, connecting up to star beings and things like that, and they think that they're going to, like, you know, heal the grand council of whatever, blah, 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 and that kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, it's just like, come back down to earth. Well, I like that you also mentioned grounding, like grounding. We are earth beings right now. Let's just like take that in and appreciate that fact and center back to the earth, because I think that's where it all starts, you know. Okay, good stuff. All right. Anything else anybody wants to bring up?
I just want to thank Johnny for that question, though, because that was really great. I really love that question. Thank you so much for bringing that to us.
Yeah, thank you. Peter says he's from Andromeda, so all right. When I
would love Andromeda. What a beautiful place.
Go there all the time. Wonderful weather this time of year. Yes. So yeah, I mean, like back when I was doing my channeling stuff, we were just talking about, channeling and that conversation and all of that. Like, I was all out there in the whole New Age concept, and it was like, connecting to the Arcturians and connecting to the Lyrans and all these different beings. You can absolutely do that. It's totally great. You can have a lot of fun with that. But I really, over the course of my particular journey, just like started focusing back on me, my body, my own body's energy, the spiritual energy that can move through your body, which you should be aware of, and grounding, and just being respectful and, reverent to the fact that we are earth beings, and that's not a bad thing. I see so many people in the New Age who just want to leave completely, and these terrible material bodies, and we're trapped in these flesh prisons. And I'm like, no, I understand. It is very strange. It is very odd, the experience that we're all having as humans at this time, because this type of spiritual consciousness that we represent has not existed in this type of body construct, or whatever you want to call it, before. At least that's what I believe. And so it's a very rocky journey that we're all in for. But I think that that's kind of grand, and we need to appreciate it, instead of just like constantly bypassing,
Hello?
Go ahead, Steve. You got your hand up.
Yeah, I always think of that old song, I like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony and all that. And when I got into meditation and I discovered people tell me they really love the way I guide them through a detailed guided meditation. They feel so blissful and happy. And so I, instead of just meditating for myself, which I also do most days, I really enjoy that. And I just extend the invitation out to anyone and anyone's friends. Everyone's welcome. It's free. Come and meditate with us online. And I guess I'm a little disappointed, because I would have liked more people to take advantage of it and word to spread, but things grow so slowly and organically, just like a plant, right? But I really do believe that, like those experiments where experienced meditators planted themselves around an area of conflict, and they all meditated, and that the war stopped, or whatever, the killing stopped, the violence went way down. And so I really believe we can be like poles of positive, peaceful energy, and we're channeling, in a sense, just pure light, and let it go to wherever it needs to go, without focusing on like a specific client or a specific person or a specific conflict. I want to believe that. I have no proof. There's no science behind it. There's no way to prove that, but I want to believe that that's true. And I just feel such a warm glow when I'm able to share that meditative space with other people. And a lot of them haven't meditated ever before. And they're like, wow, that was really pleasant. I really enjoyed that. And it was easy, because I just listened to where you were going and sort of followed. So maybe I'm the Pied Piper of free meditations. I don't know. And then the other thing I wanted to say was that like you, Sadek, Marshall, I don't follow much of the news. And when people come to me all frustrated and agitated about Trump and Musk and this and that, and I said, this is all theater of the absurd. Somebody's pointing a camera and broadcasting this like this is it. This is what's happening, and this is theater of the absurd. These are the, what do they call them? The broligarchs, the broligarchy. These wealthy white men who are now got their hands on the controls of the spaceship, and everyone's like, oh, they're steering us in a terrible place. And maybe they are, but maybe that's exactly, like someone was saying, that's where the planets are. That's exactly what was destined to happen now, because people are so frustrated and so testy, and they're mad at the Mexicans and people crossing our borders, and America first. And maybe they needed to jump down that rabbit hole with Trump and all of his broligarchs, to realize that this doesn't really serve anyone, and maybe they'll make a real mess of things, but then we will bounce back from that, and people will be awakened from all that sleep. They were so asleep, so hypnotized by MAGA, make America great again, get rid of the Mexicans. I know you're part Mexican, Marshall. and the other thing, if I may jump back, I always get hungry around this time, so I'm off camera, stuffing my face, and I would have spoken earlier, but and I know you're past the 5 o'clock mark, but or the 4 o'clock mark in Chicago time, but going back to the like alcohol and hallucinogenics and the natural herbs and mushrooms and peyote and vision vine and all the rest. I used to know a guy from Brazil a gay guy, and he was interested in spirituality, and he and his boyfriend traveled. Boyfriend took him all the way halfway across the world, I think, to Peru to do what is it that they do down there? We were talking about it earlier. The
ayahuasca ceremonies.
Yeah, the ayahuasca. And he came out of that realizing all he got from that was, I have a lot of childhood wounds. Psychotherapist in New York City could have easily told you that in like 30 minutes. You didn't have to burn a bunch of fossil fuel and spend a lot of money and go halfway across the world. Oh, geez, I'm really fucked with my childhood wounds. I think that applies to just about all of us, you know? And then the other thing is like with alcohol and drugs, I just wish people would stop making legislation and say this is good and this is bad. I've done a bunch of stuff when I want to do, and when I don't want to, I don't do it. But I trust my body. When you're born with cancer on the ascendant, the physical body is super sensitive. And the first time I tasted even beer, I was like, I wanted to vomit. It was so repugnant to me. And then I tried hard alcohol, it was even more repugnant. So my body told me, this is not for you at this time in your life. You don't want it, you don't enjoy it. So other people love it, let them enjoy it. And everybody thinks I'm in recovery. I say, oh, I don't drink. Oh, I see 12-step, right? Because here in Fort Lauderdale, everybody's in 12-step. All the gay guys, they went to the bars, they got into the alcohol scene, and I never went that route. And then as far as like the mushrooms and the hallucinogenics and peyote and all of that, those are gifts. I mean, they grow right out of the soil. They're right there for us to use if they're helpful, if we want them. But I just never really felt called to actually use. I never felt the need. Who knows? That might change at some point. But I do. I want to believe. Maybe I'm naive, but I do want to believe that, like meditating, grounding yourself, you are actually channeling some peaceful energy into the people around you, the community around you, even the inanimate things around you can be affected by that. So I don't think it's all just focusing, meditating on my own navel. Although I do have a lovely navel.
I'm sure you do. Thank you for getting back to that too, because you opened it and closed it with that, and that's actually one point that I wanted to get on. I think it was Trevor talking about it before, but when we're talking about things that we can do to heal others, it doesn't necessarily have to be a whole group or whatever, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in front of anyone else or whatever. We can also, like, as we're focusing on ourselves, if we feel like we get to a good, harmonious, peaceful place and we have enough power or energy or whatever you want to call it to move it out there, you can do a ritual. And once again, protection, sacred space, to heal other people. You can just open it up for like whoever needs that healing, like let them just naturally, energetically come into my space right now and let me, let this good energy come. You get it. Yeah. So, I used to do that when I was up at my cabin, and I would do it in a more shamanic journeying type sense. I'd do my ecstatic movement practice and all of that. I would have this like, really intense space set up. And then I would be like, any spirit out there that's connected to the land specifically, because obviously there's this whole history in Colorado of the, you know, indigenous populations, blah, 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 blah. You know, the story of America. And that's what would come into my space more often than not, was like a sort of possibly ancestral, but much more just like indigenous people who were just like lost, you know, that kind of thing. And they would come into my space and I would try to provide some energy to help them move on to the next place or whatever the case may be, as I tend to be a psychopomp in my work. And it would be a very powerful healing experience for both consciousnesses involved. You know, so while we do say like, yeah, you need to focus on yourself and you need to do this work, and obviously you want to have a proper foundation before you do work for other people in general, it doesn't have to be, I am healing the entire world. You can have a little experience and just like invite one or two people's energies or spirits in, if that's what you want to call them, and, you know, heal them with that compassion or that Reiki or whatever it is that you use, you know.
What's a psychopomp?
A psychopomp helps departed souls pass on to the next realm.
P-O-M-P, not P-U-M-P, right? You're not wearing heels when you do that.
Yeah, I could use some psychopumps next time I go to a Mardi Gras parade. That would be perfect. Yeah, psychopomp. I'm not exactly sure what the etymology of that word is, but yeah, you can find it up. Like the boatman on, or the ferryman of the river Styx is considered a psychopomp. In other traditions, like they'll show up as like birds, like in witchy traditions or whatever, it like birds show up and start congregating, then it's sometimes a sign that somebody's going to die and needs to pass on, and those are the psychopomps that usher them into the next realm, that kind of thing. Kyle does that in the astral. For whatever reason, he'll just like have these dreams where it's just like lost souls kind of wandering around. He'll be like, all right, come on, we're going. Time to move on to the next space, you know.
One of the things too that I do in my guided meditations is I invite people to really focus their tender, loving attention deep into their heart chakra, just to become familiar with that, because we don't usually spend any time visiting. We visit friends, we go to places, everything's outside, but people only feel something in their heart when they are stimulated by an external source, whether it's a person they love or a pet or a place or a food. But just to go in there yourself and see what's alive in me in there, that really gets people focused inwardly. And then I ask them to expand their awareness of their heart energy out, you know, like you were saying earlier, Marshall, to embrace the whole earth and the cosmos and even the astral and causal realms, and to get through that expansion to get a sense of how tiny we are, and yet we're all of it and we're none of it. But it pulls people out of there. And sometimes we get so focused in and tangled up in our own little human temple, and I like to expand from that, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's an interesting one for me. Like personally, I don't spend enough time in the heart space. You know, a lot of it is the Neidan and the Neigong work that I do, and so you're like moving around energies and doing different circulations, and well, like you said, back to the navel for whatever reason, it's always back here, and that very much grounds the energy in the physical, you know. But when you work with other spaces, whether it's a physical space or sort of concept of a heart chakra or heart space or whatever, you do find that there's a much different feeling, different qualities to the energy involved. And you can get into some really amazing spaces, you know.
And I think one of the reasons people don't feel comfortable to go into their heart space is they don't feel anything there. They have heart walls built up to protect their hearts, so that if they try to focus there, they feel nothing.
Mm-hmm. No, I've experienced that in the past too, you know.
Yeah.
Or talking about just meditating on any chakra in particular. It's like, I don't see colors. I don't have these particular feelings, especially way back when I first started trying to do this stuff. You know, some people will ask like genuine questions in the Spiritual Gay Men's Forum and be like, I remember one person was asking, do you guys like see crazy fireworks when you meditate? Because this is just, I'm having so much time, or having such a hard time. I've been struggling. It's just like boring and nothing's happening. And people be like, oh yeah, I just go to different realms and I see all my guides and I see, you know, all this stuff. And I'm like, that's great, but that's pretty rare. You know, especially when you first sit down to meditate. If you see anything at all, that's kind of a wonder to me. You know, like I can imagine stuff. I don't have that, what is it called, like phantophagia or something like that, where you're literally unable to visualize anything. There are people out there that have no mind's eye. It's scientifically proven at this point, which is very strange to me. I can do that, but I'm just not a good visualizer. And in all of my spiritual experiences and energetic experiences, it's very rare for me to see anything. And I think that gets lost on people. That, you know, when you do first start meditating, it's more than likely that you're not going to be experiencing anything at all, you know.
And some people are so visual and have such a tremendous gift for visualizing and imagining. I don't think they can tell the difference between they imagine their angel and their guide as opposed to actually being in the presence of it and seeing it, you know. I think there's a difference there.
That's an interesting point. You know, it's like we were talking about, where's the line between channeling and intuition and that kind of thing. It's like maybe what they're imagining is a sort of vision of that being. I don't know. I don't get there. I had a boyfriend who could just, I'd tell him to imagine something, he'd be like, done, I see it, perfect detail, every detail I can tell you, like exactly. It was just like, you know, his third eye was like crazy open. I cannot do that. Trevor, you got your hand up.
That's really interesting that you say that, Steve, because I literally just a couple hours ago was reading this book, which is literally called Angels for Beginners. Like, no joke, kind of corny. But there was this visualization that I did in this meditation that basically you created your own angel. And kind of, it was this interesting, like, full body relaxation you do, and then you focus on, like, in your mind's eye, like your thumbnail, and then you kind of focus on like a being, and then the thumbnail, and then like the being. And so the interesting part about it was saying like, oh, does it matter if this is real or not? And the background that it had from like theologians and stuff was saying that angels themselves are kind of like thoughts from God. So like whether the actual guardian angel, like your guardian angel, is made up or not is kind of irrelevant, because it's like through God's thoughts. Like that's what the angels are. So that's, I was reading it and I was kind of like, okay, that's interesting. But I thought that was kind of an interesting thing when you were saying like, what's the blending between imagination and kind of like actually having experiences. And like, I don't know. You know, like it was interesting when I did the meditation, it ended up being like, it was, you know, the Virgin Mary. So I was like, okay, am I making this up? Like, I don't think so, because this is like an actual person. So I probably not. But still, it's kind of like I'm super visual. So it's like, is this just kind of my subconscious? Is this kind of like my ego? And those are questions that like I think about all the time. And so I try to kind of separate those and just kind of let like my philosophy and the things that I've read is kind of like, when you get these messages, people are quick to be like, oh, this is just my imagination. These are just images that I'm imagining. But then like the higher realms are like, we sent those to you through your subconscious to relay messages to you. So like if you're visual and you're discarding these visual images that we're sending you, and that's how your primary communication would be with us, you know, what else do you want us to do? Yeah. So it's an interesting question, right? It's very interesting, and I don't fully have an answer.
Even if it's just imagined, like you were saying, Marshall, even if you just imagine it and it's not an actual spiritual experience, but that's focusing on it, right? That's bringing your attention to that angelic form, or the concept of them. You're opening, making yourself more vulnerable and receptive to them.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it from at least two perspectives, which is one, you have a sort of conception of what it's supposed to be, and that sort of blocks you from getting to the actual being itself and opening up to what it can be and the full potential behind it. Or like Trevor was saying, it really doesn't matter. You know, you might have this conception of it, but as long as you are intending to open up to that particular spirit or being or energy or whatever the case may be, it's gonna come through. You know, so whether you draw it in crayon or you make a beautiful AI image of it or something like that, or just have it in your mind as this like being of light, then as long as your intention is set in the right way, then the good stuff is going to come through. It doesn't matter if he's also wearing baggy pants and a trench coat or something, you know.
Amen, brother.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we're at the hour and 30-minute mark, so I'll just go ahead and start wrapping it up. If there's anything else anybody wants to say, Joel has been silent this time, so I don't know if you're still there, but yeah, probably not your cup of tea for all the things that we were talking about today, but that's fine. You do not have to respond. All right, so I'll start wrapping it up, and just thank you everyone for being here, and thank you for letting me record. I'm gonna make these recordings available on my YouTube page, but I'll also be posting them in the Spiritual Gay Men's Forum on Facebook, just so that everybody can review it. Or, you know, I don't know if it saves the chat. I'm hoping that it does. I'm assuming that it does. So if there's like any, you know, things that we mentioned, like links. Oh yeah. Mahesh was asking Steve if there's a link to the meditation group that you have. He's not here anymore. He had to go. But if you want to, you can just through me, DM me or whatever, and we could do that.
Okay.
So cool. If you guys can, anybody contribute, that's always appreciated. I always just try to cover the $10 cost a month of Google Meets so that we can meet for longer than 40 minutes. And anybody who is watching on my YouTube channel, also consider contributing or supporting me on Patreon. It is always appreciated, and I will continue to bring you good stuff from these awesome guys. So thank you all for being here and letting me record this. Now, how do I stop recording it? I have no idea. It's fine. There we go.